Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
This is our third week, alhamdulillah, on our panel. Al-Qayyum, one of the greatest names of Allah that we can see everywhere in the universe. Inshallah, this is the manifestation of Allah's name, Qayyum. We will, inshallah, continue from, continue talking from a different aspects of Qayyum, inshallah, and its manifestations. I will read this page, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. If to suppose the impossible, the tiniest animate creature was referred to nature, and it was told, "You made this," as is demonstrated in many places in the Risale-i Nur with decisive proofs, it would then be necessary to provide molds, or rather machines, to the number of the tiny creature's members and bodily systems so that nature could carry out the work. Moreover, although a group of people of misguidance called materialists perceived a greatest manifestation of divine creativity and dominical power within the orderly transformations of minute particles, since they did not know where the manifestation came and could not understand from where that universal force was being directed, which originated from the manifestation of the eternally besought one's power, supposing matter and force to be pre-eternal, they began to attribute the divine works to particles and their motion. Glory be to Allah. Is it possible for human beings to be so ignorant that they attribute the actions and works that can only be carried out by one who is both beyond space and also present in such a way as to see, know, and direct all things in the creation of all things everywhere, to particles and their motions, which are tossed around in the storms of lifeless, blind, unconscious chance that lacks will and balance? Those who possess even a jot of intelligence must see just what an ignorant and superstitious idea this is. Indeed, because these wretches have abandoned absolute unity, they have fallen into a limitless and endless absolute multiplicity. That is, since they do not accept one single God, they are compelled to accept endless gods, which means, since they are unable to squeeze into their corrupted minds the idea of one single most pure and holy essence and the pre-eternity and creativity that are necessary and essential to him, they are compelled by their opinions to accept the pre-eternity, indeed the divinity, of those limitless, endless, lifeless particles. So come and consider this complete and utter ignorance, for certainly the manifestations on particles has made that mass of particles into an orderly and magnificent army through the strength, power, and command of the necessarily existent one. If the commander-in-chief's command and power were withdrawn even for a second, that numerous, lifeless, unconscious mass would become like irregular soldiers. It would altogether cease to exist. So inshallah, we can talk about and explain, inshallah, and comment on these 5 paragraphs, talking about, again, continuing from nature. In the first paragraph, I see that, if to suppose the impossible, the tiniest animate creature was referred to nature, and it was told, "You made this," as is demonstrated in many places in the Risale-i Nur, it would be necessary to provide molds, or rather machines, to the number of the tiny creature's members and bodily systems so that nature could carry out the work. And it continues on, inshallah. This is the first paragraph.
Actually, it doesn't make that much difference, but in the original, it says like, you make this. I mean, the literal translation would be like that, I believe. If the nature was told, you make this. Bunu yap denilse.
Ah, yeah, like command, right? Make.
Yeah, command, yeah.
Like a command, yeah. Make this. Jazakallah. Yeah.
That much difference, I mean, in terms of the context, but
yeah, mashallah, Fatah, inshallah you can get your commands here, your
just, I mean, a couple of more things. I think it was last week, Brother Mustafa was telling about his chemistry teacher, who was saying nature dictates this and nature dictates that. I mean, this part shows us beyond the name Al-Qayyum, self-subsistent one, how we can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unity, wahda. The one who is not in command of everything cannot have that manifestation of the qayyumiyah, the cannot sustain the order of the universe. If we do not accept that, we have to accept that each and every particle know each other, and then they have they command each other so that they can come together and make this universe.
Yes. Jazakallah, Fatah. There's yeah, so much to talk, inshallah, today. Colin Hoca, any comments?
I don't feel that we're yet into the domain of Al-Qayyum proper. I think it's further on in the section where he starts to talk about issues to do with motion and movement, that we see the real power of Qayyumiyya. Again, here at the beginning, he's talking about the impossibility of accepting a naturalist and materialist explanation for the creation. Materialists are faced with a huge problem. They see in the universe evidence of attributes of perfection, and then they see them at infinite. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, my throat's very dry. They see them at the level of the absolute and the infinite, and because they don't want to attribute the creation, the whole of the creation to a single creator, they have no option but to divide the creator's attributes up between the creation itself. And of course, when you start to do that, if you are on the working on the criteria that the materialists are working on, they can't really attribute consciousness to what they call matter in motion, because matter is for them dead and inert and lifeless, and doesn't really have an intellect, doesn't really have a telos, doesn't really have aims and objectives. Whereas we know that the single omniscient, omnipresent creator can, because of the mystery of divine unity, or rather the enigma of divine unity, where it's easy for one creator to create an infinite number of things than it is for an infinite number of things to create themselves. They have no option but to distribute the divine names among the creatures themselves, and when they do that, they look stupid and superstitious, because what they're doing, they're attributing intellect to what they themselves claim is lifeless, inert matter. So it's a big problem for them. And it says here, since they don't accept one single God, they are compelled to accept endless gods. Every single being has to be a self-contained, self-created entity. Otherwise, there has to be a move towards unity. It's either that, or it's the issue of one creator. Either all things create themselves, and we've seen that that is completely prohibited because of its absurdity, or there is one creator that creates everything, and we've seen that that is the best possible explanation that we have for the creation. So this is Ustad Nursi at the beginning laying out his wares, if you wish, telling us that, you know, first of all, we have to make it clear in our minds that there is only one creator. Then when we've done that, we can then come to the issue of, well, how is creation sustained over successive moments, which is where the name Qayyum really comes into play, as we'll see. Thank you.
Jazakallah. And interestingly, yesterday, when I was reading Quran, I came across a page where Allah Ta'ala talks about two couples, and they have a child, and then like they pray to Allah before giving birth, and after birth they attribute like the partners with Allah, like instead of thanking Allah for the child. But Allah says the things they attribute partners with Allah, they cannot create anything, but they are created. And as you said, like the matter, for example, they're unconscious, lifeless. And in the ayah, Allah like continues, Allah says like in the ayah, Elahum arjulu yamshuna biha, like do they have legs to walk? Do they have hands to hold things? Do they have eyes to see? Do they have ears to hear? Right? Like these things that we attribute partners with Allah. They don't have legs, no hands, no eyes, no ears, right? Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the third paragraph, I see the underlined sentence. They attribute the actions and works that can only be carried out like in such a way as to see, know, and direct all things in the creation of all things everywhere. Not just, what I understand from that is that, the creator, should not only see that creature, but also, the other things in the universe.
Yeah, if a particle is entering the body, if you attribute knowledge to that particle, then that particle needs to know the route to its destination. It needs to know what it's going to do when it gets there, but also it needs to know when it gets there what kind of effect it's going to have on the next particle, which in turn is going to carry on and do various other things in the body. So the one particle entering the body has to know the whole body, and it has to know about the direction and the trajectory and the destinations of every particle in the body, because it's interacting with them. And this interaction, is absolute. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So the particle really has to have omniscience. Now, it's much easier to attribute omniscience to one being than it is to say that every single being in creation is omniscient. It makes absolutely no sense. It's absurd. And materialists don't like to question too hard, because the absurdity of their beliefs soon becomes quite clear, which is why they obfuscate with language that is basically loaded. They use terms, very, very nebulous terms, which people outside of their field don't understand. They deflect attention away from all of the absurdities and all of the holes in their arguments, because their theses and their theories simply don't hold water. They're bankrupt, and I think they know it. It's the same as the sorcerers and magicians at the time of Pharaoh. They knew the truth, and they knew that they were covering. And at the end of the day, they had to admit that Musa alayhi salam was telling the truth, and they came to believe. And I believe that one day the vast majority of materialists and scientists, that is, will, because they are the sorcerers and magicians of modernity, they will come to see the truth. And I think from Quran, it's quite clear that that will happen.
Inshallah, it's a promise of Quran. Fatih Hocam, any comments?
No, not for now.
And here in the second paragraph, I see that in the universe, we see a greatest manifestation of divine creativity. And our topic, Ismi Qayyum. So it's a major question from me. Ismi Qayyum, like the power, the manifestation of Ismi Qayyum, divine creativity and power everywhere in the world, right? Everything has kind of some power to function. Like even, for example, our Earth, like it has this gravitational force. When something drops, it falls because of the power, the gravitational power, we say. And here we see the manifestation of Allah, right? Ismi Qayyum. But people who observe that, since they did not know from where the manifestation came and could not understand from where that universal force was being directed, supposing matter and force to be pre-eternal, they began to attribute the divine works to particles and their motions. And they began to attribute the divine works and to particles and motions. Any comments on this, Colonel Hocam, whatever?
We're talking about the continuation of creation over time, over successive moments. So when a tree grows, it maybe takes 6 months, a year to grow. There is continuous motion from the time of the seed through the growth of the sapling, the growth of the tree itself, the sprouting of branches, and then flowers and blossoms. So there is a continuum, and it's very, very difficult for materialists to explain how the identity of the tree is maintained over time. And the identity of the tree, they have to, at the end of the day, say that it's nature. Nature is the one that takes care of it. Nature preserves it. Nature allows the tree to grow with a continuous, and apparently continuous, identity. And from moment to moment, it's the transformation of particles which actually brings into being the continued existence of the tree. In other words, excuse me, the continuous creation of the tree is down to these particles, where of course these particles are lifeless, inert pieces of matter. So you can't have it both ways, there's a contradiction there. So this is where Qayyumiyya comes in, because it is Allah who is self-sufficient and self-existing. There's another word for Qayyum. What was the word for Qayyum that was used before?
Self-subsistent.
Yes, sorry, self-subsistent. So Allah's self-subsistence, in other words, Allah is the one who creates beings from moment to moment and preserves their identity from moment to moment. A being, no particle, no atom can last more than one moment itself. It needs to be sustained. Allah does not give of his attributes to his creation. Allah does not place in his creation part of his attributes. Allah does not place power in his creation. Allah does not fragment his own names. So this idea that some neo-Asherites have, that actually the particles can self-sustain because Allah gives them the power to do so. This is a ridiculous notion. Allah doesn't give any of himself or any of his attributes to the things, to the beings. It's like saying that when we stand in front of a mirror, we give bits of our body to the image in the mirror. You know, the image in the mirror is there for as long as we are standing in front of the mirror. It's not that we give part of our breath, part of our skin, part of our bones, part of our flesh to this nebulous entity in the mirror called the image, so that the image can sustain itself. This is as crazy to say that as it is to say that particles are self-sustaining. They are sustained by Allah, who is Qayyum. So if you think of the mirror analogy, as long as you are standing in front of the mirror, your image will continue to exist. But you are the one that's sustaining that image. So Allah, as long as He is Allah, then the creation will be sustained from moment to moment. So the materialists can't argue on this, because there are too many holes in their theory and too many contradictions.
And in the third paragraph, it says, those who possess even a jot of intelligence must see just what an ignorant and superstitious idea this is, right? Attributing that power to particles and their motion, to those lifeless particles. And as Jazakallah, as you said, Allah Ta'ala did not give power, right? Allah Ta'ala gives power, like for example, what I see, like when I talked about in the gravitational force, for example, like the Earth has that force, also Sun has that force. Sun has maybe like thousands of, like maybe millions of times more power than Earth in terms of like this gravity. But that power, Allah Ta'ala did not give that to the Sun, right? Allah keeps giving that power, like keeps manifesting His name through the Sun.
That's the better way of explaining, I think. Allah keeps manifesting His name. You know, the manifestation is maintained, and therefore the reflection is maintained, because everything that we see is a reflection. I think I've spoken too much tonight, so we should get some other opinions.
Here,
Inshallah.
In the chat, Brother Denny says, this is amazing. How can scientists like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins really hard to believe that every single particle do not have creative power? Rather, information's infused into the particles by Allah Almighty. We only read that information. Neither we or nature involved in the creation. Imam Said Nursi really show very strong points regarding the particles' less creative power. And Manatabi says, nature, and it's happening by itself. It's a kind of hidden shirk, hidden associating partners with Allah. Tiabi, we want to hear more from you, inshallah.
I mean, we're gonna go deeper into this, but like in the older days, atom was thought to be the smallest particle, and the philosophers thought that it has its own attributes and you cannot change it. And now we know that it's not like that. I mean, atoms can change. I mean, they can combine, even they can change forms, or with radioactivity, they can become another matter. So, like, when we go deeper into material part, it becomes more volatile. I mean, nothing. I mean, we understand better that when we divide it more, it becomes more volatile. It doesn't have its own being. I mean, I'm not sure if it is clear. What I am saying is clear.
I couldn't understand the part when you said when we divide the particles, the atoms. What happens?
I mean, in the history, I mean, until maybe like 100 years or 200 years, maybe at most, it was thought that atom had its own structure and it doesn't change. That's what the scientists and philosophers thought. But now we know that it's not the case. They change all the time.
Right.
So, I mean, even if we go into more subatomic particles, I mean, it becomes more volatile. So they don't have their own being, which makes the name subsistent much more evident and seen in front of our eyes. I mean, if we have the correct perspective.
That's a great point, Fatih. That's a great point. You know, the volatility of the basic building block of matter, which is, as you say, the atom. They can't see it. They can't actually fathom it. They can't understand it. As you say, there is a flux, you know, and this sort of volatile mass of motion going on at the heart of the atom, which defies the possibility of having a stable identity or stability. And yet, this is a great point, a really wonderful point. We should thank Fatih for this, really, because this is proof, as he says, that there has to be someone or something which is giving stability to this inherently unstable mess of, you know, of matter. And Ustad talks about it, Ustad Nursi talks about it often as, you know, floods of particles, you know, moving through the universe. He talks about floods of atoms and other particles moving haphazardly with great volatility, and yet they are somehow reined in, and they're given a discipline is imposed on them by the Al-Qayyum. So a very important issue, you know, the inherent instability and volatility of matter itself, which moves in floods and currents and you know, streams of particles moving throughout the universe. Sorry, I've explained that very crudely, very badly, but I think we get the idea.
Yeah, and also, inshallah, we will talk about ether too. So it's related, inshallah. We can go more deeply there. I will read the last two paragraphs, inshallah. But before that, I want to ask about, you know, we talked about, you know, how the particles are, you know, lifeless, unconscious, and they attribute the work of Allah to them. And also they attribute pre-eternity. Like, do you have any comments on that? Like people attributing like matter, pre-eternity?
Well, where is their proof for that? Where's their evidence? They're asking us to believe, you know, on faith. It's a religious view. That it's their religious view. They have no way of demonstrating it, you know, rationally.
Even science not accepted that everything has a beginning. And if something has a beginning, and things are growing, right? I mean, if something is growing, like it should start from somewhere, like it should have a beginning, not like pre-eternity.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I know that every single being has a beginning, but Allah's creation, Allah's creating, the act of divine creativity doesn't have a beginning, because Allah is pre-eternal and post-eternal, and therefore his creativity is pre-eternal and post-eternal. But also, the fact is that, as you said, every single being that comes into the realm of multiplicity has a beginning, has an actual commencing point. So yes, from that point of view, we have to be able to explain it. But we can't say that Allah's creative act actually has a beginning, because then that causes huge problems, because then what was Allah doing before he created? And of course, that question is even more absurd, because it brings Allah into time. So I think we have to not go there. This is one of the problems. The materialists and the naturalists want to talk about this very distant point in the infinitely distant past, because they know that no one has any way of proving anything that happened then. So then they can use their, their trickery, their philosophical trickery, and their rhetoric. They can use their sophistry to blind people, and they use the word science. They keep using the word science, which is like a magical spell. As soon as people say the word science, then everyone falls quiet and says, oh, it must be right. So this is what they do. They talk about this undetermined point in the distant past, and they talk about it as though they know what they're talking about, and they don't. They have no idea, and no one does, because it's so far in the past. How can they actually talk with any surety about 16 billion years ago? How is it possible? It's not possible. But they talk with presumed authority, and they make themselves sound very plausible. And we know that it's all rubbish. It's all sorcery. It's all sorcery, the same as the sorcery at the time of Pharaoh.
Yeah, thank you for your comparing, the Pharaoh and his magicians, inshallah. Good one. Very good to understand, our times also. Fatih Hocam, I guess, do you have comments on this pre-eternity of matter?
I mean, even in terms of science, nobody talks about nowadays pre-eternity of matter, because just to make it easier to understand, for example, think of a pendulum. I mean, it starts moving, and then as the time goes, that movement dies. So it becomes stable, right? Just it stops in the middle, and then it stays like that, unless somebody else just gives it another push. The matter we see is, I mean, moving constantly, and as far as we understand, the universe itself is expanding. So, I mean, we see in front of eyes, the space is getting bigger and bigger and like created. So if it was like pre-eternal, that energy should have ended somewhere. So, I mean, in terms of science, it's really, I mean, it's really evident that it's not pre-eternal.
Allah, yeah, that's. But I guess they are compelled by their opinions. Like, I'm reading the paragraph, the second paragraph on the screen. As you said, even though it's so evident, they are compelled by their opinions to accept the pre-eternity. indeed the divinity, limitless, endless, lifeless particles.
Yeah, for example, in order for Earth to be a place that's sustainable for life, for us, think about that. I mean, there's everything on Earth that we need as living beings. And we know that some of them are from faraway galaxies. I mean, I read a couple of years ago that, I mean, the iron, I mean, even it's in the verse, but it's a kind of different meaning, but Allah sent iron from the skies, it says. Yeah, you know, I mean, the iron came from faraway stars. That's what scientists say now. And in order for, I mean, and we know that iron is very important for us as human beings. I mean, our blood has a lot of it. We need a lot of it to carry oxygen around our body. Iron is only one of the materials that we need, but like everything that we need to sustain our lives is on this earth. And in order for it to be become out of existence like nothing, there has to be billions of Earths throughout like millions of years, so that one of them can be suitable for life. When they say that it's just happened by chance, they have to accept it. There are like billions of Earths created like this, or like came into existence like this, as they say. And then one of them was by chance sustainable for life. So in order to say that it happened by chance, they have to have like infinite amount of time and infinite amount of matter on their hands. So that's why they have to propose something like that. And one other point is, when you say like infinite years before, nobody can say anything because nobody saw that, as Kolnocha mentioned. Mm-hmm. Nobody can claim otherwise.
Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Now, inshallah, this is paragraph, inshallah. So come and consider this complete and utter ignorance, for certainly the manifestation on particles has made that mass of particles into an orderly and magnificent army through the strength, power, and command of the necessarily existent one. If the commander-in-chief's command and power were withdrawn even for a second, that numerous, lifeless, unconscious mass would become like irregular soldiers. It would altogether cease to exist. So even here we see another constant manifestation of Ism Qayyum, like Allah sustains everything from particles to stars. Inshallah, I will read these two paragraphs. The first two paragraphs, inshallah. It's on ether, the matter of ether. Furthermore, it is as if another group of people see even further, that is, they are even more ignorantly misguided. They imagine the matter known as ether, which is an extremely subtle, fine, obedient, and subjugated page of the glorious Maker's activities, a means for the transmitting of his commands, a flimsy veil for the exercise of his power, a refined ink for his writing, a most fine raiment for his creating, a leaven of his artifacts, and a tillage for his seeds, to be the origin and the author, because it acts as a mirror to the manifestation of his dominicality. This extraordinary ignorance requires endless impossibilities, because ether is matter that is unconscious, lifeless, and without will, and is finer than the matter of which particles consist, which drones the materialists, and is denser than the index of primordial matter into which the ancient philosophers thrust themselves. So attribute to this matter, which may be fragmented and divided without limit, and is equipped with the qualities and beauties of being passive and ability, and being passive and the ability to transmit, to attribute to its minute particles, which are far minuter than particles of the matter, the actions and works which exist through a will and power that sees, knows, and directs all things, in all things, is mistaken to the number of the particles of ether. So this is the first two paragraphs talks about ether. And before that, in the chat, I see, before inshallah commenting on that, inshallah, I see in the chat, I see by Karabi says, volatility of the matter makes a lot of sense, since that is always what gives us the sense of stability in this world. When we ignore change of the living creatures, we start deluding ourselves with the continuity of the existence depending on the matter. Even atomic level shows us that the matter is not capable of sustaining its own stability. But when we look at like the world, the sun, the mountains around us, right there, like they look so stable, but actually, when we go into the matter, we see the instability of things. Everything actually they're created from. And before, inshallah, again, talking about the ether in the chat, Brother Danny says, before the Big Bang, there is no matter, space, time, and energy. So scientifically, matter is finite. However, Hawkins tried to escape from this situation by imagining some concept of infinite super space before the Big Bang. However, this is just a mathematical expression. And a mathematical expression requires medium before matters, time, space, and energy exists. Only mind can be medium. Hence, indirectly, God's mind need to be there, as he said, who puts the fire into equation? And there's also an answer to what we talked about. About the pre-eternity of the matter, before the Big Bang. There is no matter, space, time, and energy. So the first two paragraphs, Fatih Abi, any comments on the matter ether? We can maybe explain what it is. Ether, Colin Hocam or Fatih Abi.
Do we have any historians of science here? Philosophy of science, or physicists or cosmologists among the audience? Because as you know, I don't have any scientific knowledge really at all. I know a little bit about ether, but maybe there is people out here that can explain much better than I can. Is Harun here? Harun is here, I think. Maybe we can ask him whether he knows anything about ether. He usually knows about these scientific issues.
Assalamu alaikum. My knowledge is not very organized. Maybe Fatiha, we can elaborate more, but what I understand, ether is the smallest particle that we can conceive. So these days it is Higgs boson. They call it God's particle. Somewhat just making sense with the name, it's God's particle. It's kind of, you're getting finer at the finer level. So it's kind of a particle which just goes through any matter. So it does not kind of hit any surface. It is so small that it is barely, you just barely prove that it has existence. But it is amazing discovery to see that kind of minute particle really exists. I remember a couple of years back, there was a physicist at a university. He said that actually we will understand how this existence or how this finding of humanity will change all the technology today that we pursue. So the thing is, yes, ether, I would say, historically is something, I think, mentioned with ancient philosophers, Muslim scholars, and we know in the hadith, actually, it is mentioned as well. We know that there are hadiths which says the universe was in waves without stability. So when we look at the space, we can pursue everything is in the ocean of ether. So the ocean of ether, everything is, just sails, all planets, all other macro particles, they're all just sailing in the sea of ether, we can say. I don't know, that's all I have. Thank you.
Hocam, when you said the sea of ether, Ustad explains in Isharatül Ijaz, Signs of Miraculousness, the ayah, كان عرشه على الماء. His throne was like upon like water. And when you said sea of ether, Ustad also translates it as ether, as you said, like the sea of ether everywhere in the world. And
I
actually,
love that expression, sea of ether. That's really wonderful. I understood it very, very crudely, basically, as the medium through which all matter is moving. Because, there's no such thing as a vacuum. Therefore, there has to be something through which matter is able to move. And before Einstein, the scientists believed in the existence of ether. But Einstein's relativity theory, I think, in the formulation of his relativity theory, and in the move from heliocentrism to geocentrism, they had to get rid of ether because if they didn't, for some reason, and I'm not very clear on this, to accept the existence of ether would have invalidated Einstein's theories. So they had to make it disappear. And this they did by, I think, Einstein's relativity theory. I may be wrong, but there was a huge problem. And this is all philosophical, none of this is scientific at all. The notion of the Earth moving around the sun, is the Earth that moves around the sun, or is it the sun that moves around the Earth? The old system, the Ptolemaic system, was destroyed by Copernicus. We know this in the 16th century. But the fact is that the Ptolemaic system, the pre-Copernican system, is still mathematically valid. And you will find scientists today who say that it is equally possible for the Earth to move around the sun as it is for the sun to move around the Earth. And the mathematical equations fit both systems. Also, there is the idea that no one has ever been able to prove that the Earth moves. This again is connected to the whole discussion of ether. So these are all speculative issues, but I definitely know that ether was removed from the repertoire, from the scientific repertoire of most physicists and cosmologists because it damaged the theory, Einstein's theories. So they got rid of it, you know. So it was, they say that now no one accepts the existence of ether at all, almost no one in the scientific community, which is why passages like this in Ustad's work are controversial. They're difficult.
Actually, Colin Hocam, it was before Einstein in 1880s. There was an experiment which we duplicated in college that it's called Michelson-Morley experiment.
The Michelson-Morley experiment, yes, yeah. Thank you, yes.
And that experiment is, what they think is ether is the medium in which light travels.
Right.
So the gist of it, that experiment is you measure the speed of light by using mirrors from east to west. I can't remember because it was over 20 years. I can't remember the details, but you measure the speed of light from east to west, and then you measure it again. You turn your equipment from 180 degrees and west to east, and you find that speed of light is the same. So they think that since the Earth is turning around in ether, we should see, I mean, the lights would feel that wind of ether, so it should be slowing. So, I mean, there should be a difference between those two measurements. But when I read this, I mean, I thought about that when I was at the college too. When I read this, Ustad mentions here, their definition of ether is like the old philosophers, ancient philosophers, index of primordial matter, in Turkish, Eyyula Fihristesi, I believe, yeah. So when you define ether like that, yeah, that experiment shows that ether doesn't exist. But I mean, how do they know that ether does not get affected by the rotation of the Earth around itself? So, I mean, when you think about that, if it is denser and then if it is affected by the turning around the rotation of the Earth, then like that experiment does not mean anything. So, but I mean, since they are materialists, I mean, they should believe that there should be a medium in light as to travel. But when it comes to light, they say that, okay, light can travel through vacuum, so light doesn't need any medium to travel. But for any other thing, they need a material thing. And for light,
it's crazy. It's crazy. Do you not think so?
Yeah.
So they had to get rid of ether because ether was problematic for their theories.
Yeah.
So these are ideological issues. They're not scientific issues at all. This is why when Muslims say that science is compatible with Islam, or science is compatible with Quran, well, first of all, what do you mean by science? What do you mean by science? Because what we are given today, much of what we're given as science is ideology. And in fact, it's not compatible. A lot of what scientists believe today is not compatible with Quran at all.
Yeah, as you say, they have their own agenda. So, I mean, they are not without any agenda, and then they are not some, like a lot of them are not after the truth. They are just trying to prove their own agenda and then manipulate lots of things.
Mashallah, from what we talked, I'm actually amazed. I can from the chat. Erol Abi says, he quotes from Risale-i Nur, but the truth is so brilliant that even the blind can see it. So we also say what is unanimously agreed, that depths of the space are full of matter called ether. Subtle energies like light, electricity, and heat point to the existence of some subtle matter which fills space. Nursi's reference to ether as the tiniest possible substance filling the space time can be interpreted in relation to the more recent scientific discoveries of subatomic particles moving and interacting in space and time. And also, when we compare, for example, Ustad has, he talks about, right, the sound, the transmitting of sound. And, we know that sound is transmitted through air. And there, Ustad talks about the miraculousness in the air, right? For example, when we are talking, what we are talking right now, and you can hear my voice, and this is transmitted through air. And we know that the air is just matter, right? Lifeless, what we talk like in the first part of the panel, the air, the matter, air is just lifeless, unconscious beings, but they are still transmitting things, transmitting sound. So from that point, air is like more amazing, miraculous than the sound itself, because it's a means of transmitting. And now we said that light that travels like 1 billion kilometer an hour, right? That's speed, with that speed, that's speed of light. And light is transmitted through ether. Light is transmitted through ether, and from that point, that matter, that ether should be more amazing than light itself.
Yeah, I would take Ustad's word for this every time against the word of the scientists, because their science is marred by their ideological squabbling with each other. And this is something that it was, these are theories such as the Ptolemaic system that were around for thousands of years, and our scientists, our believing scientists, worked with these theories, calculated with these theories, engaged with these theories for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then, because of these sudden so-called scientific revolutions, which happened in the 16th and 17th century, with the astronomical revolution with Copernicus and with Kepler and with all of these others, and then there was Newton, and then of course what happened after that, it became ideological, and most of the theories which are now propounded by these so-called scientists, most of them are ideological and philosophical in nature. They're not scientific. They don't use the scientific method. They're not rationally demonstrable. And they're asking us to believe a lot of what they tell us on faith, to take it on trust. So it becomes a religious belief. So we have to be careful, someone once told me, when I was planning to talk about ether, I was planning to mention it in a talk I was giving in Istanbul. They asked me, please don't talk about ether because the scientists will attack you, and they will attack the Risale. Why should we be scared of this? I mean, maybe if you're being diplomatic, yes, but we have to be bold. We have to assert our beliefs and not be scared and not be frightened by something which is controversial. Allah alam.
Yeah, just one little point. When I read that part, when I try to understand that part, Hüve nüktesi that you mentioned, Ömer, I understand air as the gases that we know as air is, and then the ether is that part of the gases. So it makes much more sense when I think when I think about air in that sense, when I read that part that you mentioned.
So even ether is a means, you mean, or?
Yeah, it means, yeah. It means to transfer light or electromagnetic waves. Because light can travel when there is no air, or electromagnetic waves are the same. They can travel in the space too. There's no air or very, very little of it.
I like to think of it now as ether is the ocean in which the angels swim. You know, extrapolating from what Harun Hoja said about the sea of ether, the ocean of ether.
And also, Ustad talks about the planets also swimming like they're like the ships, in the ocean of ether. Yeah, I believe. Yeah, Cornelius.
Yes, yeah, it fits. And Quran is also, you know, supportive of these understandings. I'm sorry, brothers, I have to go because I have another Zoom. So
okay.
I will go. Thank you very much, and inshallah see you next week. Assalamu alaikum to everyone.
We'll Qayyum next week. Thank you, Fatih, for joining too.
Welcome.
May Allah allow us to understand the manifestation of Ismi Qayyum, inshallah, in our lives and act accordingly, inshallah. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.